Hi there, this is Sue McKenna and I'm going to be chatting to you for the next few minutes about the national postgraduate context. As you will know from watching the video that Chrissy Bowie made about the knowledge economy, there's a strong belief that having more postgraduate students and graduates will contribute to South Africa's involvement in this so-called knowledge economy. And so a number of drivers have been put in place nationally to push our universities to produce more graduates at this level. And we're going to take a quick look at these drivers. It's worth noting that in 1997, with the white paper of 1997, there was very little mention about postgraduate education. Similarly, in the National Plan for Higher Education in 2001, very little mention. Most of the focus was on restructuring the entire higher education system to make sense of the new democracy and to try and undo the various injustices structurally embedded in the system. There was, however, scant mention, but it was there, to say that we do need to increase master's and doctoral enrollments for the knowledge economy. And then in 2004, we had the revised funding formula, which we somehow still call the new funding formula. And that funding formula put a very strong emphasis on postgraduate enrollments and graduations, especially at doctoral level. And so there was a significant financial reward to increasing enrollments and graduates. It should be noted that we have a blunt funding formula, which means that the same formula is used regardless of whether you're a university of technology, a comprehensive university, or a traditional university. It's one formula used across the whole system, which has been highly critiqued in the literature because it drives all universities in one homogeneous direction, which is often challenged as leading to academic drift. The DST, the Department of Science and Technology, in 2008 in its report really started to emphasize this idea that to build a knowledge-based economy, with South Africa being positioned somewhere between developed and developing countries, we need to increase our PhD production rate by a factor of about 5 over the next 10 to 20 years. The ASAF report, the PhD study of 2010, made a similar argument, saying that across the entire science community in South Africa, there's broad consensus that we do not have enough high-quality PhDs in relation to the development needs of the country. So you can see how closely the idea of the developmental state, the need for economic growth, is being tied to this notion of postgraduate study. And you need to understand that this underpins a lot of the policies and processes that we have had as a country. But it was only in 2011 when the National Development Plan, Vision 2030, came out, which set goals for every sector of society, health, security, education, and so forth, that we really see an emphasis on postgraduate education. And in fact, this was set as the priority in the National Development Plan for the higher education sector. And graduate targets were set to move from 1,500 doctoral graduates per year to 5,000 per year by the year 2030, and with an emphasis on science, engineering, and technology and business management within those 5,000. So we see very explicit reference to the need to build postgraduate education. And in some detail, these are outlined in the National Development Plan, where it recommends that we need to increase the qualifications of higher education academic staff. At the time, only 34% of academics had doctorates, and the goal for 2030 was that 75% of academics should have doctorates by 2030. And I'm sure you can all think in your own contexts about how these national level goals trickle down to be felt as everyday experiences by academics in our universities. There was a goal to produce more than 100 doctoral graduates per million by the year 2030. The translation was that we should have 5,000 PhD graduates per year. and that over 25% of university enrollments across the whole sector should be postgraduate. So some universities may have much more than 25%, some may have less than 25%, but across the whole sector, by 2030, we should be 25% postgraduate. The controversial goal was that those universities that already have a strong culture of research should be strengthened. As I said earlier, at the moment, the funding formula is blunt. It has one size fits all. But there is an argument that because it's those universities with research-rich cultures that produce the most doctorates, taxpayers' money is best spent further strengthening those. Of course, the counter-argument is that those research-rich institutions are research-rich because of the very unequal history and unequal funding of the past. And so it's unfair to continue to reward them for those inequalities. And then there was the desire to increase performance-based grants to develop centres and networks of excellence, which, as I'm sure you know, there have been various initiatives towards this end. So let's just look a little bit more deeply at a couple of these. So at the time, the NDP came out in 2011. At the time, there were about 34% of academic staff had doctorates. The goal is that by 2030, we should have 75%. Well, at the moment, we're sitting at 46%. So we've made significant improvements since 2011, with 46% of permanent academic staff having doctorates, although it differs greatly by institution. So about 60% of academics in research-intensive institutions have doctorates, whereas only 26% of academics in universities of technology have doctorates. But we have jumped from 34% up to 46% as a sector. It is unlikely, perhaps, that we will reach 75% by 2030, which is, of course, now not very far away at all. And a goal that we should have more than 5,000 doctoral graduates per annum. At the time, this seemed absolutely impossible. There was no ways we could jump all the way to 5,000. If you have a look at this graph, you will see that we come from a very low base. Up till the 1920s, our doctorates, even if they were done in South Africa, were actually accredited overseas. It is a very steep graph, but even if we look at its very steep climb to 2012, just after the National Development Plan came out, we had 1,878 people graduated with doctorates in 2012. A very steep graph, but still a long way off that goal of 5,000 by the year 2030. But if we update this graph, which our most recent data that I have to hand, it's been verified as 2017 data, in 2017 we had 3,057 people graduated with a doctorate. So this very steep graph continues to rise with some degree of surprise. I think people are realizing that we are on track to reach the 5,000 graduates per year by 2030. I'd like you to consider, though, a few of the challenges associated with this enormous climb. We need supervisors, skilled, competent, experienced supervisors to supervise this enormous growth. Do we have enough, given we've had an increase in staff getting doctorates, but we're still only sitting at about 46%, as I said in the previous slide. And there are question marks around the quality of some of the doctorates in this country, particularly because we see a number of doctorates being unable to get even a single publication from their doctorate. And as you'll know from the Higher Education Qualifications Sub-Framework, one of the quality indicators of a doctorate is that it should merit publication. If master's and doctoral education is particularly highly subsidized by taxpayers, then taxpayers should get the benefit of having such knowledge produced and subsidized by them. Sadly, as we know, very few people actually read a thesis, and it's only the dissemination of knowledge produced at master's and doctoral level generally does not occur through the thesis. The dissemination occurs in other ways. It might be workshops, policy documents, media statements, but primarily it will be through academic publications. And we are increasingly seeing that we're getting doctorates who cannot publish. And so there are questions being asked about whether this rapid rise in doctorates has brought with it problems around quality. And it is a fairly controversial issue, but it is at least one of the reasons why we are currently having the national review undertaken by the Council on Higher Education of all doctoral education across South Africa. We should bear in mind that that national review of the doctorate is not a review of individual students or individual student studies. It's a review of South Africa's universities to say, are you as a university managing quality processes sufficiently that we can safeguard the quality of the South African doctorate? Of course, with this rapid rise in doctoral and other postgraduate qualifications is a rapid rise of students in the system. So this is students who haven't just registered and they haven't just graduated. And the number of students who are in that middle zone, that has increased greatly. And it's often known in the literature as the burden of supervision, or the supervision burden, because the number of students coming into the system has increased very rapidly. Although, as you saw in the previous graph, we've done amazing work in terms of graduation, we nonetheless still have this very large body of students who are sitting in the system and who are needing to be supervised. So as you can see here, the first column is the number of enrollments in 2017, and the column on the right is the number of graduates in 2017. In 2017, we had 3,057 doctoral graduates, but we had 22,572 register. And so there are issues about the capacity of the system to continue taking on students at this rate. While the funding formula does indeed greatly reward graduation through the research output part of the block grant, it also rewards enrollment through the teaching input part of the block grant. So there are questions there. Universities will get subsidy, part of subsidy, simply by enrolling students. There is money to be made simply by enrolling students, even if those students do not complete. I'd like to think that no university simply enrolls students just to get money, and that they do follow the necessary precautions to ensure that they can guarantee suitable supervision and so on. But questions do need to be asked around this huge increase in enrollments and whether universities are doing sufficient careful reflection on their capacity to do well by those students that they're accepting. It also says that the NDP also said that most of the doctorate should be science, engineering and technology, but in fact we've seen very little shift. This graph only goes up to 2012. I need to update it. But you can see there isn't a huge shift. What you see on this table is master's students, how long they've taken to graduate, and on the next slide you'll see a similar slide for doctorates. And this comes from the CHE Vital Statistics. And if any of you who are watching this are actually busy doing your masters or doctorates, perhaps you should close your eyes for a few minutes, because these are somewhat sad statistics, I think. If we look at the accumulative on the far right-hand side, you will see this is the 2012 cohort. If we look at the very far right of this graph, you will see that by 2017, in other words, 6 years after enrolling for a master's, only 58% have graduated. So 58% of students graduate with a master's within 6 years. Bear in mind that the master's is, at least according to the funding formula, a 2-year qualification, but we see that only 40% of people complete it in 2 years. 40% do it in 2 years, 58% do it in 6 years, so 42% will have dropped out or possibly still be busy with their masters after 6 years. If we look at the doctorate, we can see that after 6 years, 52% of people complete their doctorate within 6 years. So just over half of people complete a doctorate in 6 years. 48% will either have dropped out or take longer than 6 years. Given that the funding formula tells us that the PhD is 3 years, we need to ask questions about the efficiencies in the system and why it is that our students are taking so long. Bear in mind, though, that 3 years is probably unrealistic, because in most countries around the world, the PhD takes 4 years full-time. And most people in South Africa are doing the doctorate part-time. So you can read more about the statistics and to get an idea of the context. I would highly recommend the first two documents there. You will be able to find them on the Are You Connected site. The first one is the CHE's little vital statistics booklet. It comes out every year. The 2020 one is not out yet, so I've got the 2019 one, and it always shows you the statistics from 2 years previously. So it's an overview of the HEMA statistics. So that's a very useful little booklet if ever you want to see what's happening in the system. And the second bullet there is Ahmed Essep's publication that's just come out on the size, shape and higher education in South Africa. And that's another very useful text, because it's important when we reflect on our own practices as supervisors to not only think of our personalities or our departments or our students, but to realize that we are part of far bigger forces and mechanisms, and to try and make sense of how these impact on what it is that we'd like to do and what it is that we can do. I hope this PowerPoint presentation was useful to all of you.